This is Dutchess County, New York. It is one of the wealthiest counties in the United States of America, and consequently one of the most powerful counties in the country as well. It is the home of IBM headquarters, the Texaco Research Center, the Vanderbilt family and estate, and the Roosevelt family and estate. Here lies the grave and tombstone of the late President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the godfather of the New Deal liberal doctrine, and his wife Eleanor Roosevelt. This family still remains affectionately embedded in the hearts and souls of the American people in particular, and the Western world in general. And in the midst of Dutchess County's wealth and international prominence exists one of the most explosive, racially charged cases in the annals of America's history. On November the 28th, 1987, a 15-year-old African-American female by the name of Tawana Brawley was found unconscious and in a garbage bag in the backyard of her family's former address in the Pavilion Condominium Complex in Wappingers Falls. Wappingers Falls is located in Dutchess County, New York. In addition to have been found unconscious and in a garbage bag, Tawana was also found with cotton stuffed in her nose and ears, KKK and nigger bitch scrawled over her body, and dog feces smeared on her being as well. According to Tawana, on November the 24th, 1987, approximately 8:30 p.m., she got off a short line bus in front of this Mobile service station, which is located on Route 9 in Wappingers Falls. As the bus proceeded north on Route 9, she walked.
Come up on me. We're live at Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Welcome to the show. We have a few technical difficulties, but today's guest, Melva Hill Jackman, PhD. You look very familiar, Melva.
I've been around.
Well, I see that this book is quite a stir, huh? We played, the last 2 weeks we've been dealing with this subject matter. I've become very sensitized to it because of all the lies that we're dealing with today, and here you come up, they called her a liar. But how they dealt with this 15-year-old child who is claimed to have done all this stuff to herself, or in cahoots with a gang, because she was hanging out with a boyfriend who was in jail at the time, and that how did these gangsters, political gangsters, Abrams and the rest of the folks, Pagonis, and what really bothers me now, how they got away with it. But today she is paying this man, what, her salary's being garnished.
It's more than $100,000. I think
No,
it's
it's
$431,000.
$431,000.
It's quite a lot.
25 years after the fact. Now, how is this happening in America? Well, we know how it happened, but to still go on like it has.
Well, it's like, I wrote this book. I don't consider myself an author.
Okay.
I'm not a book writer, but I followed the case over the years.
Okay.
And I felt that one day I would be reading somebody else's book, explaining how this happens, because the questions were always in my mind. You know, I always believed her, but the questions of other people believing was always an issue to me.
Okay.
I waited and nothing happened. So when I retired, I said, well, you know, I guess it's my time now. If nobody else is going to do this, I will try to do the best I can with it. And I took my time. I got as much information together as I could. And this is the result. And I think that this is probably the most definitive work of the facts of the case.
Okay.
To me, it was a travesty for this to happen to a 15-year-old girl. Worst part being that she wasn't believed. At 15, this was a traumatic situation for her whole family. And not only she wasn't believed then, she's not believed now.
Yeah.
And that's, I can't rest with this. The subtitle of the book is Why the Investigative Files Must Be Released. Because she cannot have any peace in her life until this is resolved.
Right.
As an individual, she has lived her entire life, she's well in her 40s now,
Right.
with this hanging over her head. And she can never have a resolution until somebody does something. So the purpose of
this has got to haunt her.
It haunts me.
Okay.
So I know it haunts her.
Okay.
It's a haunting story.
What is it about it that haunts you?
That's exactly what. The injustice?
Well, I'm a believer in justice.
Okay.
Whether that's naive or not, I'm not sure, but I believe in justice.
It's the American way.
I'm a teacher,
Okay.
and I try to teach a belief in justice to young people that I come across.
Okay.
This story flies in the face of justice. It isn't even believable that anyone could believe that she did this to herself.
Yeah, that's what.
What this shows me is the power of media
Okay.
to corrupt a story,
Right.
to take facts and corrupt them in such a way that the majority of people believe the lie rather than the truth. So, I hope everyone will read this book.
Okay.
I hope you will read it, soon and get back to me. Somebody out there has the power to do something about this, I believe.
Well, I'm going to start off. Do we have our roll-ins ready to do anything? The second one, I want to show the doctor and how she was found to prove that something happened to her. All right? Now, here's the doctor from the ambulance, which we ran last week, but I want to run it for Melba.
It was the ambulance. It wasn't a doctor. Was it a doctor?
The interview was done by
Medical person,
Clemson.
Yes.
So, can we run it?
No,
No.
the Mac is the problem.
The Mac is the problem?
The signal from it.
Can't run any of them?
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
All right.
Doctor, today we're in the period of Me Too.
Yes. Absolutely.
Me Too,
Believe the women.
but not this young woman. What's the corollary here? Or is there a corollary?
I think the story is, in a sense, stale, in that it isn't at the top of anybody's list, except maybe here at your on your show today. I'm so glad that you're bringing this out again. It's an old story.
30 years old.
Right, and unless it's brought back to the fore, it will be forgotten. The people who were involved are all getting older now, and another reason for writing it down, because, in a few years our memories begin to fail us, and you don't remember the facts as they actually are, and you cannot talk the way you used to. So the facts are here, and hopefully something can be done to work with it, with these
Talk
facts.
about what the grand jury report hinges on as, quote, proof that nothing happened to her, and match that with your investigation. If you can pick 2, 3, 4 things, whatever.
And who wrote the grand jury report?
Well, that's in question. That is in question, and here in the book, I do have a section on the grand jury. The investigation itself was questionable.
Right.
A lot of information was ignored. A lot of information was omitted. A lot of investigation was not done. Things that could have been investigated were not investigated because they didn't want to know the truth.
Because of the fact that Pagona's father was a judge?
Well, the incident, it was a case of well-placed young white men in a small community.
Okay.
Pagonis' father was a judge, but he was more than a judge. He was also a very powerful political leader
Okay.
in Dutchess County. His uncle was a judge.
Oh, the
as
uncle
well.
was a judge?
It's the family line. The other individual, who was the state trooper, who is rarely mentioned. And most of the works in the grand jury report, his name is not even there. I'm sure it's not by accident. Scott Patterson.
Patterson.
Scott
His
Patterson.
father was second in command for New York State Police.
What?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, second in command, New York State Police. So, and the Christ, Harry Christ, was just a guy. He was a friend. He was just a friend of theirs from school, from high school or whatever. He was just a friend. And there was a fourth friend whose name was Gene Branson. And he's another one. There's no information about Gene Branson. Somebody needs to ask Gene Branson about what happened, because Gene Branson was in the circle of activities that were going on.
Well, tell about the murder of Chris.
Oh, it's so much. Okay.
The
There's
murder of
a
Chris.
chapter. I have a chapter called Who Pulled the Trigger? And that's my chapter about Chris. And it's, I don't want to read the whole thing to you, but I'll try to tell you a little bit about it. Harry Christ was found dead in his bed a few days after Tawana Brawley was found.
Right.
He was found by Scott Patterson, who was his friend. Scott Patterson apparently found the body. He said that he had gone to Chris' house to check on him because he had been depressed for the last period of time, and he just wanted to check on his friend. And when he got there, he found him dead. He didn't call 911. He didn't call the sheriff's office. He reported this to the state police. The state police came to do the investigation on this case. As soon as he called the state police, he also called Stephen Pagonis as his friend. This was it was a very close group of people. Stephen Pagonis got to the scene of the death before the investigators.
Okay.
So it was Stephen Pagonis and Scott Patterson there doing whatever they were doing before the investigators arrived. All of the evidence of the shooting was collected by the state police
Okay.
so that they had full control over it.
Okay.
Harry Chris' body was taken to the morgue and then went for examination. And at the time, Scott Patterson said he committed suicide. And then the state trooper said he committed suicide. And it was repeated so that the whole world believed he committed suicide.
There's no collusion. There's no collusion.
There's no
collusion.
right, there's no collusion. The world, everybody believed he committed suicide for 10 years. Because this happened in 1987.
All right.
And for 10 years, the general belief was that Harry Chris committed suicide.
Was
and
there a reason for him committing suicide?
they gave reasons for him committing suicide. They had started to build this story up about him being depressed.
Okay.
He had applied for a job with the state troopers, and he didn't pass the test or wasn't high enough on the test, and he was at 29, which was, I think, the last year that you could be accepted. So therefore, that door was closed to him. So they used that as part of the reason. He also had a girlfriend who chose someone else in that same period of time.
Okay.
And he wrote a letter that they identify as the suicide note, which, according to Alton Maddox, and I've never seen the letter, I've never had an opportunity to read the letter,
Okay.
but according to Alton Maddox, it was essentially a love note, a letter of regret to this woman that he was committed to, and he thought they were going to have a relationship for life, and she then chose someone else, and that's what this letter supposedly was about. Anyway, Chris' body went to the morgue, and an autopsy was done. 10 years later, the doctor is finally involved in the investigation. And this is only because of the defamation case. I know I don't hate to jump around. It's such a long story. Part of the story takes place in 1987-88.
Right.
And then the second part of the story is 1997-98. And the 97-98 is the defamation trial where Stephen Bergonis sues Alton Maddox and company for having defamed his character by calling him what they called him, which was a rapist and murderer. In 1998, at that trial, the second trial, the defamation trial, the defendants...
There was never a first trial.
There was never a first trial.
Okay.
And, you know, that is the travesty.
Okay.
That's the travesty, because had there been a trial, a lot of this information would have come out
Earlier. 10 years earlier.
10 years earlier, and that whole hoax story would have gone away. But it didn't. So 10 years later, Alton Maddox, C. Vernon Mason, and Al Sharpton are on trial for defamation, and they are able, because of the trial, to bring out a lot of new information.
Okay.
Through, I can't think of the word now, this is a senior moment.
Well, the disclosure.
Disclosure, that's not the word I'm trying to think of. Discovery, that's the word I'm trying to think of.
Yeah, right,
because of
right.
discovery, they're able to demand certain documents and so forth.
Right.
They got as much as they could. And as I think was mentioned last week on your program, it was the longest trial, a civil trial in the history of New York State, purposefully. Because that was their only opportunity to try to bring out the information. And they struggled every minute of the time with people stopping them from bringing out information.
Can we go back to Chris and why Chris was murdered?
Okay.
Because of the fact that he took Tawana out of the trash can and saved her life?
Yeah, okay. Let me, I can't tell you about that. But let me finish telling you about the Chris case.
Okay.
Okay? When they finally did get the doctor on the stand to testify about Chris' death certificate, they found that the death certificate didn't say it was a suicide, number one.
Okay.
The doctor never said it was a suicide. The doctor testified that they brought Harry Chris' body to the hospital with no evidence whatsoever. No photographs, no gun, no note, just a body, saying to the doctor he committed suicide. The doctor never wrote that down. On his death certificate, and a copy of the death certificate's in the book, it says death by gunshot wound to the head.
Okay.
That's all it says.
Okay.
The doctor says without definitive information, there's no way that any doctor would be able to call it a suicide.
Okay.
Okay. So I just wanted to get that in about. So Chris, also, they removed the bullet from Chris' body, which I found interesting, and it's a question in the story because they say he had a .357 Magnum.
Right.
And when I looked up about .357 Magnum, I read a little about the history of .357 Magnum. It was developed in, I think, like the 1920s or 30s. They were, the police were outgunned by the criminals, and they developed these better guns.
Right.
And the .357 Magnum is supposed to be able to stop a car, try to go in and break a engine block, that sort of thing. And the bullet was still in Harry Chris' head.
So it couldn't have been a .357. Because the .357 would have blown his head off.
All I can say, and I've tried very hard in what I've written here, to only stick to what I know to be
Is that true, Graham,
the
about
facts.
the .357?
There are different, I wish I had some ammunition with me. I did a demonstration for some kids a week ago. You need to know what type of round was used. Because we use different types of rounds for different effects.
But a .357 is so effective that it would blow his head
It
off,
can
wouldn't
take your head off, yes.
Okay.
Now, was it a round-nosed bullet? Was it a wad cutter, semi-wad cutter? Was it a hollow point round, semi-jacketed? All of those factors determine the effective the effect of the wound on the body.
Okay.
All right? I use a specific round for a specific purpose that I use all the time. Now, the bullet was retrieved from Harry's skull,
But it came from what kind of gun?
357 Magnum.
It
But
came
he
from-
did not own a 357 Magnum.
Let me interject there, okay, as far as the 357 Magnum, because I have a question about the bullet.
The weight of the,
The doctor said it was a jacketed bullet. He didn't know, the doctor did not know what gun it came from or what kind of gun it came from.
Okay.
The state police produced a gun later, which was a 357 Magnum. They said they tested that gun and it matched the markings
The
or whatever
markings.
of the 357 and that bullet. But only the state police say that. I never saw a report of that. I don't know if there is a report. If there is, somebody needs to ask about it.
Okay.
So if they didn't have a report, it didn't have to be a 357 Magnum. It could have been any gun. The doctor just said it was a bullet. It was a jacketed bullet. And he turned it over to them, and that's all he knew.
now that jacketed round is usually jacketed with copper. And the lead is inside that copper jacket. That's why they call it a jacket. It wraps around the lead bullet. That bullet went through the mandible and up into the rear of the head. And the funny thing, bullets can be funny in that they strike an object and there's the curve in the back of the skull could send that bullet and change its trajectory depending upon the angle which it came through from here to the back of the skull. Or it can go right out the skull, all right? I got shot with a 22 years ago, and I got hit in the left side of the head, and the bullet literally ricocheted off my head. So it depends upon the angle of trajectory and the shape of the object that it strikes. The thing about this,
Why was Chris killed?
well, we do know that there was an argument. Those four guys went to Danbury, Connecticut.
Okay.
We think. They say.
Or they
Well,
say.
They
Pagonis
say.
on the stand stated that they went to Danbury,
Danbury.
Connecticut, and the body, what conversation they had in the car at 11 o'clock in the morning, that they discussed something about a body being discovered in a trash can, which was Tawana. But she wasn't discovered until 2 hours later. Now, this is on the grand jury. Pagonis stated this.
My feeling is that what Pagonis stated is not necessarily the truth. I
But
question.
he mentioned this.
I question whether there was a trip to Danbury, because during that early afternoon or morning, a postman reported. That's Tim Losey, I believe his name was. He reported that he saw 4 white men in a car cruising around the area where she was found.
Okay.
I don't know. You know, these are things I think that still need to be found out. So it's possible that they never went to Danbury at all. In the defamation trial, Pagonis was asked to produce evidence of his trip to Danbury.
Right.
And he had no evidence. He couldn't say what he bought. He couldn't say what his friends bought. It was 4 of them. He had one handwritten receipt, which means nothing. Anybody can get a handwritten receipt with a date or whatever on it.
Stores don't
That is
produce.
the only evidence that he provided that they were in Danbury at all. So I leave that as an open question
Okay.
as to whether they went to Danbury. I do believe there was an argument.
And in that argument,
Yes.
it is stated that a gun was put to Pagonis's head by Harry Christ.
Yeah.
Harry Christ was a police officer in Dutchess County. And the funny thing is,
So
and
he's a
this was
police
what
officer?
Alton asked, he
I
said,
uh,
thought he was trying to become a trooper.
no, because
He
trooper,
was
he was a police
He
officer.
was a deputy sheriff.
A deputy
Right.
sheriff who wanted to be a trooper.
Become
Right.
a trooper,
Ah,
state
okay.
trooper. And Alton asked this question of Pagonis. Well, it's very funny that a guy put his gun to your head, and you're the assistant DA and assistant DA, and you don't report that a guy put a gun to your head and threatened to shoot you. And that guy winds up dead subsequent to that incident. Why is it that you, as an attorney, as an officer of the court, do not report the criminal behavior of a police officer against you? And that was a question that Pagonis could not give a substantive answer to. If this guy is a loose cannon or whatever, he needs to be removed from his office and his gun needs to be taken from him. But you don't do that, and now he winds up dead. So, suspect. They would not give information. When we come in, when we have a dead body, we do a full crime scene. Because we don't know if it is a suicide or a homicide, or, third category, accidental death. When I come to the medical examiner's office, I have to present all the facts and information that I have to work with the pathologist to make a clear determination as to how we know how he died as a result of a gunshot. Who fired the shot is the question. So whether it's a suicide or whatever, I've had pathologists ask me, well, portion of the face is missing here. Person jumps in front of the train. The metal nuts on the third rail cover board would rip those pieces of flesh, and I myself retrieve those pieces of flesh from the cover board down in the track. So I have chunks of flesh that I've recovered, and I can say this was caused by this. In this case, the doctor knew it wasn't a suicide from the beginning. Alton had to fight to get the crime scene photographs, which they would not surrender. They ultimately gave us one Polaroid photo. And it was not from the scene, it was from the medical examiner's office. And it was a photograph of Harry Christ's body laying in the morgue. Thank God, the shot was taken from the feet looking up to the head. So that told me that the death was not accidental.
Who killed Chris?
And it wasn't a suicide.
Who
Because
killed Chris?
in a gunshot, in order for you to take a gun and put it to your jaw and pull the trigger, I am going to be looking for gas, I'm going to be looking for powder burns, I'm going to be looking for what's called stippling, which are the fine flakes of lead that come off the bullet from the rifling of the barrel that will come out behind the bullet and melt right into your skin. None of those factors were there. It was a clean gunshot wound with an abrasion ring. And when a bullet moves, it spins. And as it spins, it twists and heats up and melts the flesh around the hole. And that leaves an abrasion ring. And that abrasion ring also tells us the angle from which the shot was fired. None of that was the only thing that we had in that photo was an abrasion ring. And I told Alton, this is not a homicide. So he was able to call it
Not a suicide.
not a suicide.
Were
All right,
you
well,
able,
let's-
in that photograph, to see, in the autopsy report, the Dr. Oplaska also mentioned
There was a
that he had a half-round abrasion
Abrasion.
on his chest.
yes, caused by, and I said to Alton, this is during the course of a struggle.
That's what I'm thinking.
I said, he was cut with the front sight of the gun.
Okay.
Most likely, somebody was trying to shoot it and there was a struggle. He was shot at close range, but he did not shoot himself. And that was the same thing that the doctor said when he came into court, because Alton did not want to call the doctor unless he knew what the doctor was going to say.
Why was he murdered by Pagonis? Because Chris...
You don't know that he
what
was
about the
murdered by
story of-
Pagonis. Don't say
What
that.
about the story of Chris taking the body out of the trash can and putting it on the ground so she wouldn't be, you know...
Well, there's a theory.
That's a theory.
There's a theory that to cover up what had been going on for these days with Tawana, when they had finished whatever they were going to do and they were ready to dispose of her, and they were trying to figure out how to dispose of her, they settled on putting her into the dumpster. There was talk of murdering her.
Well, that's murder right there.
Well,
putting it in
there
the dumpster.
was talk of shooting her.
Oh.
I only get that from a report that someone said Tawana heard that. In her
okay.
dazed condition, she heard a conversation about maybe we should just kill her. And somebody else says, you know, we don't have to kill her. Anyway, she was put into a plastic garbage bag. She was put into the dumpster alive but drugged. I don't think that they intended for her to come out of that dumpster alive.
Right.
But she did. Somebody helped her out of that dumpster.
Didn't the neighbors see somebody at the dumpster?
Yes, I
And
have.
supposedly a car that looks like Chris's car.
And I believe that was them putting her in the dumpster. I believe that.
Who took her out of the dumpster?
That's the question. That is the question, and I haven't been able to uncover any facts to show who took her out.
All right.
But one of those 4 people, I think,
All right.
one of those 4 took her
Let me
out.
show the audience. I want to show the audience Abrams talking about the trial. All right. Now this is going to make everybody heated up.
Talking about the grand jury or
the
the
grand
trial?
jury indictment. Now this is Eyewitness News. I think that's number 4 or 3 or one of them. Eyewitness News 1. All right, play that piece and we'll come right back at you.
And the Eyewitness News team. Now, Eyewitness News.
Tawana Brawley was not the victim of a forcible sexual assault by multiple assailants over a 4-day period. There's no evidence that any sexual assault occurred.
New York Attorney General Robert Abrams for the first time and officially calls the Tawana Brawley story a lie and closes the investigation that has commanded headlines filled with charges of racism and perhaps most importantly finally answers the haunting question of whether a gang of white men kidnapped and raped the then 15-year-old girl. Good evening, I'm John Johnson. Bill Butell is on assignment. John Mahler is here. Here are the developments in the Tawana Brawley case in brief. The grand jury report says there's no evidence to support the story that Tawana was abducted and raped last November. New York Attorney General Robert Abrams says that point by point the story is not true and that the Brawley advisors have jeopardized the rights of future victims of racial assaults. Tawana Brawley and her family have not been heard from and no one is certain where she is. Reverend Al Sharpton and other advisors have reacted strongly to Abrams, attacking him as a racist and not caring about black victims. There is other reaction on the grand jury report, and we'll have those stories in just a minute. But first, Tim Minton has been covering the Brawley story for all these months. Tim was at the courthouse today in Poughkeepsie, and when the grand jury report was released, and at the news conference held by State Attorney General Robert Abrams supporting the grand jury finding that the Tawana Brawley story is a lie. Tim is here now with his report. Tim.
John, it's not just my report. Of course, it's the grand jury's report. And when you read this report, it's hard to get past one page. That's the page where jurors prove that Tawana Brawley wrote racial slurs on herself and then smeared feces over the slurs. It's at the guts of Tawana's story. For months, her advisors have ridiculed anybody silly enough to suggest the filth found on Tawana was self-inflicted. Now, the jurors who spent months listening to all the evidence say just that and more. The Brawley report is tough, detailed, and blunt. On the key question of whether Tawana was raped, the grand jury says no. There was no medical or forensic evidence that a sexual assault was committed on Tawana Brawley.
If a 15-year-old girl had been forcibly raped or sodomized by multiple assailants over a 4-day period, there is a high probability that medical or forensic evidence would have been found.
What about that gang of white men, the alleged attackers? The grand jury says no. No gang, no men. And jurors point out, Tawana Brawley never provided a detailed account of her allegations or named her alleged assailants to anyone. As for the kidnap story, the report says no. It says the teenager actually stayed in a place she knew well. Jurors found Tawana Brawley had significant contact with her former apartment at some time during her 4-day disappearance.
Carpet fibers consistent with those from apartment 19A were found on the jeans, on the blouse, and the shoe Miss Brawley was wearing when discovered on November 28th. A burnt seam of denim and other charred cotton materials were scattered on the living room floor. The jeans Miss Brawley was wearing were burned and had pieces missing, and there were pieces of charred cotton found with the bag in which Miss Brawley was discovered.
Then there's the question, the Brawleys say it's the only question, of cover-up by officials. But the grand jury found no cover-up. The report says there is no evidence that a cover-up occurred or was attempted in this case.
Significant numbers of personnel were assigned to the investigation by the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office, as well as the Dutchess County District Attorney's Office. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was contacted by the Sheriff's Office while Tawana Brawley was still in St. Francis Hospital. The FBI was contacted based on the racial epithets on her body, even before she indicated that a white cop, quotes, was involved. All of the key evidence in the case was sent to the FBI laboratory in Washington, D.C.
But as to whether there was a cover-up by the Brawleys, the grand jury says yes.
It was alleged and indicated that Tawana Brawley was abducted, sexually abused, raped, sodomized over a 4-day period by 3 to 6 men, one of whom was a police officer. Those allegations are untrue. The people who made those allegations lied.
The Brawley report also deals with the people accused.
I let that run on to show you all the lies that were told by Abrams. Now, he was Attorney General of the state at the time.
Right.
Now, we have pictures of, now what 15-year-old would scrawl nigger bitch on her chest.
Right side up.
And right side up.
And right to left.
And cover herself in feces. Shit, to be quite frank. And put herself in a plastic bag. Now, you heard what they said. Now, this is the Attorney General speaking. Now, who wrote that report? It wasn't from the grand jury. It was written by Abrams himself. Now, how did they get away with something like this? I mean, how did this make you feel listening to this sort of crap?
Well, there was one grand juror.
Oh, I have a tape of him. I have a tape of him.
African-American, who stated that, in his opinion, he was not convinced of the grand jury report. He didn't agree with it. He refused to sign it. And he also brought out the blockbuster that the grand jury didn't write the report, which is required by law, which in essence makes it null and void, I would think.
Right.
I would think. But someone has to challenge that.
Tawana never appeared in the grand jury.
She refused to. She refused to.
The victim did not appear. The victim did not convey her story to the grand juries. And they said there's no medical evidence. It's interesting that in the civil trial, see, she was denied her constitutional rights and safeguards because there was no arrest, there was no investigation. But there were over, I think it was 103 pages of medical documentation that Attorney Stanton presented. Unknowingly, he opened up a can of worms because he thought there would be nothing in the report, but there was 103 pages in the report. So if a young lady made this up, there's no way in the world they would have 103 pages of medical documentation to her condition. Also, was a Vitulo kit done on this?
Is that a rape kit?
Rape kit.
Okay. A rape kit was done. But there's a story behind the rape kit as well.
Let's hear that, Paul.
Well,
Well, you want to hear the doctor who found her?
Oh,
Okay.
we got, that's the guy who was on last week?
The ambulance.
Did you see that?
Yeah, I've seen all of Minister
Okay.
Clemson Brown's films, all of them.
right.
Before I started to write,
Okay.
I watched everything he had videotaped.
All right.
So it was an integral part of what I was doing. But now I forgot what I was going to say. Okay, she came into the hospital as a Jane Doe, unidentified and unconscious.
Right.
The medical records say she was unconscious. The EMT says she was unconscious. And later on, she became like semi-conscious and then gradually was able to think again. But clearly, nobody can fake being unconscious.
Right.
They did tests. They did the ammonia under her nose,
Right.
to which she didn't react.
All right.
She was unconscious. They kept her in the hospital for a relatively short period of time. She was only in the hospital for 6.5 hours.
Is that all?
6.5 hours.
Why?
Again, you know, there's so much to the story. It's so hard to bring all the facts together. It's a closed system. The ambulance, the volunteer ambulance people, the deputy sheriffs, the fire department, they're all the same group of people. The volunteer fire department. So I think, and
What's the size of this town?
I don't know, it's not a large town, but it's not a city. It's not a city. But at any rate, when they brought her to the hospital, the deputy sheriff was at the hospital by the time she got there. Within minutes of the time that she got there, there was an officer on site at the hospital. And the officer was on site the entire time she was at the hospital.
Okay.
Interceding, getting the evidence, trying to find out what's going on. Is she awake? What does she know? Can she talk to me? The detective that was assigned to that case, his name was George Brazali. And his position was detective of arson for Dutchess County, arson. Now they sent him there to the hospital. Their explanation was, well, her clothes were burnt. So they said because the clothing that she had on was burnt. How they even knew that, I don't know when they dispatched him. But they said because her clothing was burnt, they sent the arson guy. Now the arson guy is a friend of Pagonis.
Ah, okay.
The arson guy had been socializing with Pagonis during that week.
Okay.
Anyway, he was there. He gathered all the evidence. He collected all the clothing. He got statements from everybody who came in. Yes.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Things are coming back. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
She was semi-conscious. When they finally, other things were going on. When they identified her, finally, they took some photographs of her. The same Brazali took photographs of her, face and body. Within 2 days, nude photographs of Tawana showed up on TV, as they talked about this story, with nobody being able to say where those photographs came from.
Right.
Not with the with the black mark across the breast or anything. Bare photograph of her on TV. Brazali was a detective on duty that night. Tawana refused to talk to him. He tried to come in and make contact with her, and she experienced like a fear reaction, so they sent him away. By the time her aunt came, her Aunt Juanita, who was like a surrogate mother to her, she was very upset when she saw her condition, and she asked the hospital personnel, "Did you do a rape kit?" And they said they hadn't done one. And she was a knowledgeable person in the community. She worked with the youth department. And she couldn't understand, well, if the police are here and you think it's important enough for 4 detectives to be here, why didn't somebody do a rape kit? And she insists that it be done. If she hadn't insisted that that rape kit be done, it would not have been done. So reluctantly, the doctor did that kit, did the test, clipping the pubic hairs and scraping under the fingernails. And all. You would probably be able to describe better exactly what they do. They gathered up that information, and who signed for the rape kit? George Brazali. And he took the rape kit and all the other evidence with him that night, saying that he was going to put it for safekeeping in the sheriff's refrigerator.
That's why there's no evidence of a rape. Yeah.
Well, 4 days later, they had some proof that they mailed the kit to the FBI in Washington, D.C. Okay. And they do have, like some kind of postal receipt that they sent the kit to.
So they tampered with it?
It was corrupted. Okay. Right, maybe they left it out, maybe they put it in the oven, I don't know. Whatever they did, nobody could get any information from it.
Okay.
And now, I believe it's not even available. I don't think you can find it anymore.
There are people who are watching this who they say, yeah, y'all talking,
Yes.
but Abrams is a government official. I believe them then, I believe him now, the news reports, Menton, and all this other. What would be one of the rocks of truth thrown back at that report that we saw that would make somebody stop and say, well, maybe they're telling the truth? They, meaning us.
There was one page in the police report. It's notified, it's page 19. The police report that was done that day, the day that she was found. And they did their investigation, walking around asking people if they saw anything or what have you. In that police report, buried deep into it, there is a paragraph that says that he was a deputy sheriff who did the initial investigation. He and a detective walked the grounds of the area asking questions, but before that, they walked around supposedly looking for evidence of her. He said looking for footprints or something like that. And they walked to a section of this development. This was a large development, and it had a sewerage treatment plant to one side of it. And in his statement, he says they walked past the sewerage treatment plant and into the woods, just outside of this development. And it's written there, he says, there was a tree house in the woods. And this tree house had a bed, a mattress, and a chair. And at the foot of the tree house, there was a rock fireplace that had been used within the last few days. Now, this is what the detective wrote in his report, what he observed. And then it says, but there was no evidence of anything there. And they never took any pictures of it. It's in the report. They went around and they took pictures of the cotton fiber and the empty plastic bag, and they took all those pictures. But this site, which we didn't know, the public didn't know, the only reason why it's known is because the police wrote it down themselves. And in the entire investigation, which went on for 8-9 months, with all of the people that they had working on this case, nobody read the police report, which says there was a treehouse and a mattress and a chair and a fireplace. Nobody. It's not in the final report. It isn't anywhere. That's a part of the cover-up. And I think, to me, that's a convincing thing. That with the medical records, you said.
You know what? I just want, before we go off, I just want you to run the doctor that discovered her. So somebody that didn't see the report, after all this, I want you to hear from the white doctor that examined her before, when she was found. All right, can you find that piece for me?
I questioned Mr. O'Connor, the executive director of the Sloper-Willen Ambulance Service, about Tawana's condition upon their arrival on the scene where Tawana was found. And this is what he had to say.
Ms. Brawley, according to the report, was found in a unconscious, unresponsive state. The ambulance crew determined that she did not react to painful or verbal stimuli, which means that they tried to arouse her by just, calling, not her name because they didn't know her name at the time, but saying, are you all right, are you okay, and shaking her, see if she responded to that. It's a typical practice, a normal practice, and it's taught in EMT courses, paramedic courses, but also in regular CPR courses. You want to determine if the person is unconscious, and she didn't respond to that. The next step would be to either do some sort of painful stimuli test, which would be either just pinch the skin or something along that line. And the third test that they did was to open up a ammonia capsule and run it underneath her nose, and she did not respond to that. So at that point, we put her into a category of unconscious, unresponsive, unknown etiology or unknown origin. We don't know why she was in that condition, and we treat her according to the standard practicing protocols.
Did she condition from the time she was picked up to
the time she was dropped at St. Francis Hospital?
The report just states that from the time Ms. Brawley was picked up at the scene, during the transportation to the hospital, she started responding in a way that she was moving around, she was breathing better, her blood pressure. Somewhere en route from the time we left the place where she was picked up to until we got to St. Francis. So the time that she was in the ambulance, she started, quote, coming around in somewhat. She did not regain consciousness, she did not start speaking, she was not verbal, but she started to move around as opposed to when she was first found, and she did not respond in any way, shape, or form.
4.
2, it could be again.
Mr. O'Connor whether he and his staff believes something happened to Tawana, and this is what he said.
I think from the records and everything I've looked at and all the people I've spoken to, something happened to Tawana Brawley. What happened, who did this, how it happened, I don't know. That's not for me to find out. But I think
you do know
the way she,
that something
I do know. I do know that something happened to Tawana Brawley. That I don't think that she was in a condition where people saying that she's faking everything. I don't think that happened. I think that something unfortunately happened to Tawana Brawley, and our job was to take care of her medically, which is what we did, and get into the hospital, which is what we did. And that's probably the bottom line. From our side, it's the bottom line, because the Tawana Brawley case was to us was a 15-year-old girl that something happened to, and we treated her.
Mm-hmm. Now, the gentlemen who were on the scene, have they commented? Have they given an opinion relative to her condition, whether or not they believe something happened?
The only comments that they're making are the official comments they make, on the record and things like that. And they
Case like that.
As you see, there's other people are just covering this up. This doctor makes a testimony of that something happened.
Yes.
That's the only reason I played that, to give the audience something to think about, especially after Abrams claimed that there was no evidence of a rape. I mean, this is nonsense.
Winston, in these type of cases, you have a major case unit that comes in to handle these cases, not an arson detective. I worked in major case, all right? We handled specific types of crimes: rapes, homicides, suicides, shootings, stabbings, shootings of police officers, and shootings by police officers. That's what we handled in major case. We have to be certified to do those investigations. An arson detective doesn't do homicides, doesn't do rapes, anything like that. I had to be certified by the state and the city as a homicide investigator. I was also certified in sex crimes of rape, sodomy, forcible compulsion.
Well, that's the right way to do it.
I was certified. And if you don't have someone there, you call outside of your agency to get somebody to come in to take. I've worked jointly. I've been detached from the transit police to work and assist the Manhattan DA's office, the Kings County DA's office in specific crimes. Where I didn't report to work, I reported to the district attorney. This is the way it's done. This was a cover-up from A to Z. And there was no Tawana Brawley case. There was a civil case of Stephen Pagonis versus Alton Maddox, C. Vernon Mason, and Reverend Al Sharpton. There was never a Tawana Brawley case, and that's the travesty.
What's the real tragedy is that this young lady in her 40s now is paying Pagonis. Her salary is being garnished.
She was terminated,
on a
I believe.
defamation suit that he won for $431,000. And this is why this is why I have this show on.
That was based on a specific action of the judge in the defamation trial, because Tawana was not a part of the defamation trial. She didn't testify. She didn't show up. She wasn't there. She wasn't a witness or anything.
Right.
It was determined, Alton Maddox and the team determined that when this happened, when these things were said, she was a minor.
A minor.
So therefore not responsible. And the full defamation case went forward without any determination on Tawana. When the case had ended, the judge on his own, alone, made a determination that Tawana was going to pay restitution.
How do we get her out of this?
We find somebody who knows the law and who's got a lot of backbone and some source of funds to get it done. Now, at the end of the defamation...
Can we start a GoFundMe?
I would be up for that. I think if something should be done.
The administrative law judge of New York would have to be willing to consider this case. Also, we need an attorney to take the case. The late Brooklyn DA, oh man, my mind is going. Ken Thompson reopened the case in the murder from 50 years ago with the boy they killed in Money, Emmett Till.
All right.
See, justice can be delayed, but it cannot be denied. The truth comes to light. But a GoFundMe, we'd also have to find an attorney willing to pick up this case.
That might be the
We'll make
biggest.
an appeal out here right now. All you guys out there want to do something about injustice, here's your chance.
The case is, it's a cold case, but it's not a dead case.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of information out there. And as I did my research, I did a FOIA to New York State Attorney General's office for information to go beyond the information that I was able to get by, that was available to the public. And they told me they had many boxes of information on this case.
All right.
But it was going to cost about $50,000 to get it.
All right, so, all right, I think we should do something about
I think that's the start. To get the records, get the files, and get people who know how to read the files and find the information, and then that's how you know if you can make a case or not.
Did you put in a FOIL to the FBI for what they had?
I didn't get anything from the FBI, but some blank pages, some redacted pages, not worth even mentioning. But there were some pages, some FBI pages are included at the back of the book, which the defamation trial was able to bring forward.
You want to give us some closing remarks?
I'd like to read a little bit. I don't know how much time I have. You just stopped me.
You got a minute.
Okay. The final chapter of the book is called Take Another Look, because...
50 seconds.
Okay, God. Only someone in total denial of the facts, of the known facts of the case, or unaware of the facts, could draw the conclusion that 15-year-old Tawana Brawley concocted the events that took place between November 24th and November 27th, 1987. At the time of her discovery, there was no question on the part of the ambulance team or the nurses in the ER that she had been assaulted. But by the day following her discovery, the sheriff of Dutchess County, Fred Skorlik, already publicly expressed disbelief about her complaint. And on the television news interview, minimized the statements that had been made by the police officer,
The God in
Tommy
me
Young.
loves the God in you, and stay tuned for more. We'll continue. All right, God bless. Power to the people. Go ahead, finish. We got another minute.
Only someone in total denial of the facts could believe that Tawana wrote on her own body, cut her hair off, and pulled out patches of it from the root. It wasn't just cut, pulled out from the root. Smeared dog feces all over her body and then faked unconsciousness to the extent that 3 trained emergency medical technicians could be duped. Only a person in denial of the facts or unaware of the facts could believe that she could have convinced a private gynecologist unknown to her family that she needed to return to the hospital for immediate admission, or that the professional personnel at the Westchester County Medical Center would admit her and treat her for psychological trauma and provide physical therapy. Should I let it end there?
Thank you. You're going to hear more about this. Thank you for coming. God bless. Peace, power to the people.